we'll officially start the meeting here in just a couple minutes, but anyone who's here who wants to speak tonight, we do have public our public comments actually at the end of the meeting, so it's not going to be for a while. Okay. Oh, I'm sorry. If you want to submit anything for it to us via email or something, if there's a way to get the information to us, we'll definitely consider it. Thank you. Sorry. Anybody else that would like to speak, though, please feel free to sign up at the podium. And we will have public comment at the end of the presentation tonight, and look forward to hearing from you then. So with that, Heidi, I don't know are you ready to take roll call? I know, you got all kinds of hats tonight.
Okay, let's see. For attendance, Ryan Larson, Jim Moulton,
Present.
Hudson Hayward,
Present.
Steve Egan,
Present.
Jessica Damon,
Present.
Haley Coulis. Here. Kim, I believe, is tonight. Gregory Greenleaf.
Present.
Ian Beatty.
Here.
Amy Spelke.
Here.
Tony Goncalves.
Present.
Frank Wright.
Present.
Going to be absent tonight. Okay. And
Yeah, Mary and Kim are the two that, sorry, Mary, oh yes, Mary and Kim are not here, and our new representative from Topsom is here. So Catherine Brilliant
okay, perfect.
is here. So welcome to your first meeting this evening. It's still this workshop. It's great to have you here. Thank you for stepping in and filling the vacant role or the vacant seat for the Topsom representatives. And hopefully you'll be able to pick up and learn some things this evening, and looking forward to having you on the team now. So thank you. With that, if we can all please stand and join me in the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance. So before we get into the presentation this evening, I'll just mention one more time, I think everybody heard me say this, but if we do have at the end of the presentation, we'll have a time for public comment. If you'd like to make a comment at that point in time, we'll need to have you sign up at the podium. There is a sign up sheet, so please add your name. If questions come or anything during the presentation, please feel free to stand up and go write your name down to make sure we capture that, and allot you some time at the end here to ask your questions or provide some feedback. With that, I think we're going to jump right into it. We have Harriman here this evening, who is our contracted architecture firm to help us work on our facilities master plan. They've been here multiple times for different public forums and done a lot of work with the facilities committee. A lot of really good work. I think the facilities committee has really driven this process forward in a great direction and beginning to start to form some thinking, or kind of some thoughts are coalescing here. And we felt like it was a good time to bring the rest of the board into the discussion and ensure that the work that happens from here forward happens in a direction that everybody is feeling confident in. So I don't know, Andy, if you have anything you want to add, you definitely please do.
I can. Just so everybody knows, a lot of work has been done. We started with a conditions assessment that Harriman has done, established a lot of costs, a lot of need, and then they've started to refine those needs into options. And so a lot of what we've done to date as a facilities committee is try to help them narrow down the options. The forums kind of guided some of the decision-making that established like the needs for every community wants a community school. So that was a very important thing. And so a lot of the things that have been done to date are fixated on the schools and what to do with the schools. We do have other buildings that haven't been defined as much through this process yet, but like Frank was bringing up, building 376, the administrative office, transportation garage. we haven't focused on those. We've been focusing on the schools. So they have a lot of good data that they've compiled. I'm impressed with the amount of work that's been produced, but they're looking for direction from this workshop to try to wrap up their process, finalize their report. We felt that the options that were remaining needed more direction from the board than the facilities committee alone was ready to take on, because, you know, they're big decisions. It's a lot of money. So we felt it was necessary to have them come in and help guide us through that process.
All right, thanks, Andy. And Sean, I'll put you on the spot. I don't know if there's anything you want to add. I didn't ask you before. If there may not be, but I just wanted to provide an opportunity if there is.
Yeah, thanks, Ryan. I I don't have a lot to add. I do just welcome Harriman tonight, and I'm hopeful that, you know, the board starts to really wrap their head around kind of next steps, and I'm hoping Harriman gives us a good understanding of what those next steps might look like to try to get to some unified decision making, with the hopes to someday in the future present this to the towns, possibly in a referendum as to what we're going to do and where we're going to go. So I'm hoping we can put some work into that tonight, and I look forward to it. And I look forward to that. Thanks.
Thank you, Sean. All right, Lisa, with that, I will turn it over to you guys. So welcome. Thanks for coming and looking forward to the presentation.
Excellent. Well, thank you for having us. My name is Lisa Salwin. I'm a partner and architect at Harriman. I lead our pre-K through 12 design studio. Steve Frazier is with me tonight. He's a project manager. The two of us have been working very closely with the facilities committee on this work. And so we're excited to be in front of the board tonight, let you know what the process has been to date, let you know where we're at in the process, what we have concluded, and what are the remaining pieces that are still being worked on. And it was, as was mentioned before, we really want to get feedback from the board. We've gotten a lot of great input from the community. We've had several forums and several outreaches. And you'll see throughout here the voice of the community and what they're looking for. And I think it was mentioned tonight, there's a really strong desire to have, you know, a school in each community. But we're going to walk you through it. And then at the end, there's an exercise that we want to engage everyone in to get your feedback on the remaining options. All right, let's see if I can get this to advance. There we go. All right, so we're going to start with project overview. Then we are going to walk you through the data collection summary. So that was that facilities assessment that was mentioned earlier. And although the options don't start to consider some of those other buildings, the facilities assessment definitely looked at all of those, building 376, the admin building, and the other facilities in the district, and identified the condition of those buildings as well as critical, which means more immediate repairs needed, and then long-term repairs that would be recommended. There's review of the options, summary of community feedback, and then we'll get to our interactive exercise, and then really talk about the next steps and the process. All right. So why do you pursue a master plan? So the purpose of a long-range facilities master plan is to provide all of you with a valuable fact-based planning tool for your future facility-related decision-making that will be consistent and supportive of your academic mission. The planning is intended to be an extensive process that will include school administrators, teachers, staff, students, school board, and community members. The master plan is intended to be an essential tool. And I will emphasize tool, and this idea is that this is going to be a living document. We're going to get to a certain point with a recommendation, but the data, you'll see a lot of it's in an Excel spreadsheet that can be easily manipulated, and Sean and his team and facilities can utilize that for different planning purposes and things like this, but it's a living document. There are going to be things that change after, you know, recommendations are made, and you can be able to finesse that. But it's a tool to help guide the school district regarding space allocations, renovation, and or new construction, land use, land development, accessibility, safety and security, expansion and or consolidation and infrastructure needs. The plan should be supported with short and long range cost projections to help with budgeting and forecasting. And the diagram you see over on the right-hand side really talks about all the different parts and pieces that go into the master plan. The first, I will say, 4 bubbles, green bubbles, are really that data collection. The data collection has to do with the facilities assessment. And what we mean by that is a team of architects and engineers. Harriman's an architecture and engineering firm. So we had our architects, our engineers walk each of these buildings, assess the condition of the buildings, identify different things within the buildings that we would note maybe are not in code compliance, beyond their useful life. So like think about your mechanical systems in your house. They don't last forever. They have a certain lifetime, that about 30 years, 25, depending on the system. After that, they start to fail and need to be replaced. So we identify things that are coming up to their end of useful life, at or beyond, and that helps you to start to be able to plan accordingly. We outline clear issues, needs, and goals for the coming years, including all academic, recreational, athletic facilities. Part of that is the programming piece, and we'll go over that. We sat with all the principals, we talked about how they're using their building, what's working, what isn't, what spaces they are missing, which ones aren't, correctly sized, and then any programs that are coming up that need space. We partnered with NASDAQ, as a company who did enrollment projections. And so they're looking at your enrollment, historical enrollment, today's enrollment, and projecting what it will be. And then we're also looking at the capacity and utilization of your building. So how are they being utilized? How many students can they provide the programming that they're providing in that building? And that allows us to understand, is it overutilized, underutilized, or kind of at capacity? And then the two other areas that, or one area that continues throughout this is the community engagement and communication. But the two things that will continue to develop up until the recommendation is the capital project plan and the overall master plan. So the capital project plan is a very long spreadsheet. Per building, everything that is recommended, itemized cost, so that we can start to strategize on the timing of different capital improvement project plans in the future, or projects in the future. And then once we get to an overall option for the long term of the district, how are we going to address the facilities long term? That is kind of the long range plan for the master plan. And I'll make a little bit more sense as we go into the detail here. All right, so where are we now and what have we done? We've completed the initial crucial data gathering and community input phase. I will say initial community input phase for the long range facility master plan. This is focused on addressing the immediate 10-year and long-term capital needs of your aging facilities, school facilities, to ensure safe, equitable, and modern learning environments for all students. So some of the things we also talked about is education has changed over time. So there's different things that are needed in the different buildings to provide education. So what has been done? We had a kickoff meeting, and we've had regular facility master plan committee meetings. And this is where we establish the goals of the project. The FMC committee, or the facilities committee, provide feedback and input throughout the process. So we kind of described to the facilities committee that our job is to provide the data. Our job is to provide all the data for consideration and provide different things for you to consider. And they are the ones that are giving feedback to us to help really arrive at what is the best solution for your district. So there's a lot of great conversations happening in those meetings. Facility and site condition assessment, we've talked a little bit about this already. We are looking at identifying critical needs. Those are the things that need to be done in the next 0 to 3 years. And then long-term needs are from 3 to 10 years. And those repair items were coming out to about $67 to $81 million for all the projects. That did not include the programmatic needs of the buildings. Capacity utilization and program needs analysis. We identified programmatic deficiencies in the buildings. We were focusing a lot on ADA requirements, specialist spaces, and dedicated collaboration areas, along with improper sized classrooms and newer programs such as kindergarten and pre-K. Enrollment projections, like I said, we had NASDAQ do the enrollment projections, and we reviewed and summarized the findings. Essentially, there is the enrollment is trending down, and you'll see later in the presentation more input or more detail on that. Community engagement, we've hosted 3 public forums to date, and we've gathered vital feedback on priorities. The data collection and engagement process generated 12 preliminary draft options. So we came forward with some options, we heard feedback, we created more options based on that feedback, and those 12 have essentially been whittled down to about 5 at this point through the process. Included in those options are rough order magnitude costs. And we also, in the community forums, we had a poll, a live poll that they could give us feedback and things like that. We left that open afterwards. And I think we actually maxed out the software at 250 responses. So we actually opened it up the next time and allowed it to be, we went and got beyond 250 so we could keep it open longer. But you can tell that there's a lot of feedback coming in from the community, which is great. We want to hear from the community, want to make sure that you have a solution that's supported by the community. All right, so I talked about project goals. This came out of the kickoff meeting and the conversations with the facility committee. We always ask at the beginning of a project, essentially, what would make this a successful process? What would make this a successful master plan? And so the goals came out of that conversation. Thorough analysis to determine useful lifespan. They want to make sure that it's an authentic and realistic plan. It's a financial tool to help the district plan for the future. It's logical and organized. Help answer questions with a rational approach. Optimization of buildings for students. And provide options and impact on taxpayers. Okay, so here's our approach to the master plan. The different bubbles, the ones in green are the ones that we've essentially completed at this point. The ones in yellow are continuing to be ongoing until the end of the master plan. We've talked about the kickoff meeting. We talked about the facilities assessment, capacity utilization study, and enrollment projections. And tonight we're going to go over some of the options that have been formulated and narrowed down for the long-term master plan. We'll show you a snippet of the capital project plan itself, kind of what that entails, and then talk about some more of the community engagement. But one of the critical pieces tonight, again, is your feedback. So I'm going to go through the different sections so you have a understanding of the data that went into these options, and data collection summary, so facilities condition assessment, energy usage, program needs, enrollment and capacity data are what we're going to cover. So these are your schools and buildings within the district. These are the ages of your facilities. So what we start with is the year that the building was built. And then there are renovations and things that have happened that kind of create, we'll call it an average age, which are noted at the bottom. Some of these have maybe a younger average age because they have been renovated or expanded at certain times. But we, as a rule of thumb, we look at the U.S. Department of Education, National Center for Education Statistics. And in their report, they indicated that according to Ornstein, when a school is 20 to 30 years old, frequent replacement of equipment is needed. And that ties back to what I was saying, the useful life of different things. Materials don't last forever, systems don't last forever. We do have to replace them in time. Between 30 and 40 years old, the original equipment should have been replaced. So this is when you start to see a school needing a major renovation. At 40 years, a school begins rapid deterioration. Again, another argument for a major renovation to be able to address that. After 60 years, most schools, not all, are abandoned. So again, just a benchmark. We see lots of schools, especially in New England, that are much older than 60 years old. They have been added on to, renovated, continued their life. But just, it gives you that benchmark, because then when you look at the age of your schools, all the ones that are highlighted in blue, and some of those aren't schools, some of those are other buildings, those are all near 70 or beyond. All right, data collection, facilities condition matrix. This is a very high level summary of the condition of the buildings. There is probably 1,000 pages that support all this information in the report. But this is a great way to be able to get a quick glimpse at the condition of the various buildings within your portfolio. So what we do is we have each of the engineers and architects go out and they assess the overall, let's say, site. So our civil engineer will go out and assess the site. And they will have different recommendations they make within their site report. But then they say, in general, what would be kind of the condition rating I would give the site? And that's what this is showing. So in our report, the backup has all the detail for each system, whether it's maybe critical, good, or fair. But what this is excellent would be good. So think of your new school, your newer school, Mount Ararat High School, mostly blue, right? Because it's newer. Good condition, maintained, and no reported issues or concerns. So that would be the green items. And the way to read this is your schools are across the top and the different systems are down the left-hand side. Fair is the yellow, average wear for building age, continue to maintain. Poor is the orange, worn for use / end of expected life cycle met. So these are the ones that start to really need that attention. Critical, extremely worn or damaged. Replacement, repair, or attention immediately necessary. That's really those critical items. And not applicable is the gray. So what you can do is across the top, we have adult ed is the first, Bowdoin Central, Bowdenham Community, Building 376, Harpswell, Mount Ararat High School, Mount Ararat Middle School, the Superintendent Office, Transportation, Williams Cone, and then Woodside Elementary. And so what we did is just to kind of point out kind of the ones in more need are those that have more of the red, the orange, and the yellow. And some of your buildings that are in the most need are Building 376, Harpswell Community School, Transportation Building, and Williams Cone have some of the greatest, more immediate needs within their building. So in our report, you will then find a dashboard for each school. This is just a snapshot of an example, but it kind of shows you how to read all this information. So the report's really well organized, very clear. So this is Bowdenham Central School. There's a Excel chart at the top that really goes over kind of the general data of the building. What are the grade levels? When was it built? When were there additions done? What is the square footage? Then we have the legend for the rating system, and then we have the building's overall existing system assessed condition at the bottom. On the right-hand side, we had, at the time of putting this together, 24-25 enrollment, we have that enrollment, and then, sorry, calculated capacity. We have all that data, you'll see it later on, but the idea is to be able to show you how much of the building is being utilized or not. And we'll show you the exact information for that. And then we have existing energy usage, in particular, the EUI. EUI is energy unit intensity. What that means is if you think about miles per gallon for your car, it's a similar metric for buildings. And so really looking at the energy use intensity of each of the buildings and the overall cost per square foot for those buildings. So this is kind of the lead in to each of the buildings, and then all the detailed information is behind that. So this is the example of those data sheets for each building. And then behind that, you would see the detail for civil, ADA, structural, HVAC, so on and so forth. And so I'm just going to kind of put these up on the screen for folks to kind of digest, and I will then get into some of the comparisons. We've kind of already compared the condition assessment of the schools, and the preceding slides, we're going to start to compare the capacity, and we're going to start to compare the energy use of each of the buildings. But this just gives you a good snapshot of the information found in the report for each of these schools. As well as the other buildings. So behind each section for each building, you will then find a very detailed Excel spreadsheet. I know nobody's supposed to be able to read this. But what this is every recommendation our architects and engineers made, there's a line item for it. And there's an item number that ties back to where it's in the report or where the picture that's related to that item. So we have the school name in the Excel spreadsheet. We have the item identifier. So it has an item number that then ties back to all the detailed information. The type of system, and then item repair recommendation, repair timeframe. So is it critical or is it that 3 to 10? And then the cost of that repair item. The initial column is done in 2025, and then for each out year, there's an escalation factor. The reason I share this is a Excel document that can be easily filtered, so that you can filter it by school, you can filter it by priority, you can filter it by type of system, so that if you need to dig up information on your building, you can easily do that and start to prepare for any of your upcoming budgets and CIP plans. On the right-hand side is a snapshot of some of the graphs put together showing the critical repair cost and then the 10-year cost graph. And so different schools have different more critical repairs, and then other ones have more sort of out years repairs. Energy use data. So you're going to see this blue graphic kind of large here for each one of the schools. On the right-hand side, I summarized some of the kind of more easily comparable pieces of energy use. So you can see the schools on the left-hand side, so starting with Bowdoin, Woodside, Bodenham, Harpswell, Williams Cone, middle school and high school. And then we looked at the EUI. And with an EUI, the lower the number, the more energy efficient your building is. And then a great way to be able to compare apples to apples is both the EUI, but then also look at the cost per square foot that you're spending on energy, because then we can compare cost per square foot across all the buildings. So we first look at, what are those schools that maybe have a higher EUI? And the ones that kind of rise to the top in this data are Bodenham and Harpswell. They're all in the 40 or 50 range. Woodside's getting close to 40, and so is Williams Cone. You have a really low number with the high school. That's because of the solar credit that you're receiving as part of this building. And then we look at, as we walk through it, we also are looking at the condition of the building and we say, does anything just not make sense? And one that didn't really feel like it made sense was Williams Cone, just based on the condition of that school. So we said, why is that? Why is it a 38 and some of these others are in the 50s and when it's 97 cents a square foot? Like the design of it isn't as efficient as the numbers are telling us. So we dug a little deeper. Some of your schools have AC, this one does not. It has unit ventilators, and unit ventilators don't always provide the amount of ventilation you need in a space to meet the code. So when there's less ventilation, there's less draw on the electrical or the utilities. And natural gas is being utilized instead of propane, which is less expensive. So that's why it's driving the cost per square foot down. And then we also looked at, why is Mount Air at 36.2, but it's one of the highest dollar per square foot? We realized that building 376 is fed through the middle school. So that's one of the reasons that one was going up. So it allows us to kind of gut check some of these and see. Still a little concerning that Bodenham and Harpswell have such a high EUI. So something that we'll want to look at as we're starting to look at these recommendations. Yeah.
Question, Ryan, is that okay? Bowdoin Central is a pretty new school. Why do you suspect that EUI and cost is higher than I would expect?
Yeah, it's a good question. We'd have to look at the makeup of the wall assembly and things like that and the systems that are in there to see why it was at the 54. Baseline is usually on average in the United States is about a 50. So it's not horrible, I would say, but it's higher than the others. So definitely we want to look to see if there's anything we can do to make it better.
I might be able to speak a little bit to that too.
Yeah.
Bowdoin Central, we're on a private septic field over there. So we have a pumping station, which adds to the
Electrical.
electricity
Yeah.
usage. We also have a well over there. So we pump well water. And we also have to boost that water inside the building. So we're running multiple pumps for the water systems as well. So just a couple things that come to
Yeah.
my mind when I
Yeah,
think
and that
of
definitely,
additional.
you have
energy.
that ongoing electrical
Right.
draw. Yeah, that makes sense. All right, so I'm not going to go through it in great detail. That compared all of them, but you can see the different data for, this is Bowdoin Central, we have Woodside, Bodenham, Harpswell, and Williams Cone. And then Mount Ararat Middle and High School. And then Adult Education, Superintendent's Office, Building 376, Transportation Building has a huge draw for energy. So programming needs. So we can't just look at the facility, the infrastructure. We have to look at what are the programs that you need within the building? Do you have the spaces for them? What modifications may need to happen? So we met with each principal of the building. We talked about their plans. This is the theme. These are the themes that came out kind of across the board for all of the schools. Needs to address safety and security items. We need improved and additional specialist space. One of the biggest things that we've seen change in schools is the amount of specialty programming that you need these days, where you might have more special ed programs, or you might have more interventionists, or you might have more different programs that need smaller space to pull students and work with them in small groups or one-on-one. Adequately sized programs based specifically pre-K and the arts. Collaboration spaces, more storage. These last two we hear at every school that we go to. More storage and more restrooms, specifically staff restrooms. You think about, a school of a certain size, and sometimes we only find one bathroom, maybe two in the whole school for the staff in the building. So this is per school, so this allows you to drill down a little further and see the uniqueness about each of the schools, what we heard at each of the schools in regards to those programming themes, as well as missing spaces. This helped us start to define some of the programmatic needs within the schools and solutions going forward. I won't go in excruciating detail here, but all that information is there. Enrollment and capacity. So the enrollment projections are really helpful, because what they'll do is they will look at several things. They're going to look at your historical enrollment. They're going to look at US Census Bureau population trends. They're going to look at live births in the area. They're going to look at housing sales data. They had conversations with local realtors and talks about new residential construction start. So it not only looks at the history of students in the district, it looks at the in-migration, folks that move into the district that aren't necessarily born here, maybe folks that move out of the district. It looks at housing that is beginning, maybe in the pipeline to be constructed, so we can start to put in a factor for how many students that housing may bring. So all of that is factored into the enrollment projections. The most accurate when we think about projections is the first 3 years, because it's based on data. After that, it is truly a projection. They are using different things that they spell out in the report to arrive at those projections. But we broke it down into some kind of digestible pieces here. Looking at historically the time period of 1990 to 2020 population growth. You had population growth in Bowdoin and Bodenham, some 42% in Bowdoin, 39% in Bodenham, 0.38% in Harpswell, so not a lot, and 9.3 in Topsom. The median age, however, has increased between 2000 and 2023, meaning people are aging in place and retiring in the area, reducing the number of children in the school system. So in Bowdoin, it went from 36.3 to 44.6, Bodenham 39 to 48, Harpswell 45 to 61, and then 36 to 46 in Topsom. Population trend showing a decrease in ages 0 to 18-year-olds between 2013 and 2023. So we saw a decrease in Bowdoin, 24 to 19%, Bowdenham, 23 to 19%, Harpswell, 16.9 to 9.5, and Topsom, 22 to 19.4. And then births are also down. So you can see that the births have declined in 2019, between 2019 and 2009 and 2019, by negative 10% in Bowdoin, negative 47% in Bowdenham, negative 15% in Harpswell, and negative 25% in Topsom. So these are some of the factors that are really kind of impacting the downward trend in population. So they also look at the birth to kindergarten relationship. So how many kids are born here and make it into, and then how many kids are enrolled in kindergarten. So that's kind of that in-migration, out-migration. The district typically enrolls slightly more or the same number of kindergartners than the number of recorded births. So 97% pre-K ratio. Real estate trends, the number of family households increased in Bowdenham, but decreased in the other 3 communities. The number of persons living alone 65 plus has also increased in every community except for Bowdenham. There are more planned housing projects that will have some small impacts on the expected population. So in summary, if we look at, we remember those 3 years are the most reliable, the population's done out until 10 years. And the next 3 years, overall, pre-K through 12, it is projected to have a decrease of almost 170 students. And of that, 126 are in grades K through 5. Then we look at capacity. Capacity is an interesting exercise because you really have to look at, when you're doing capacity study for schools, you have to look at the programming that is being delivered in those schools, because different programs, it's a certain student to teacher ratio in each of those spaces, and different sizes are needed for different size spaces are needed for different programs. So it's a pretty detailed analysis. In the elementary schools, we look at really the classroom usage. In a middle high school, we're looking at classroom as well as all the other specialty spaces like gym and music and art and things like that. But we're utilizing a utilization factor because when we get to the middle and high school years, we have to deal with scheduling. And so we need flexibility in that schedule. So typically we see anywhere from a 75%, 85%, or 90% utilization. For this study, we utilize 75% to provide the greatest flexibility, but you have the data to look at all those numbers depending on which one. With that said, the summary is in yellow. You have 2 schools that are at capacity. So Harpswell Community School, current enrollment is 155. The calculated capacity is 164, 95% utilization. We consider that at capacity. You never want to be at 100% utilization. It's just, it can be too tight, not enough flexibility. And then Mount Ararat High School, current enrollment is 716. And if we utilize the 75% utilization, you're at, you would have a 735 capacity. And then Bowdoin, Bowdenham, Williams Cone, Woodside, and Mount Ararat Middle are under capacity. So that means there is more room to house more students within the programs that are being offered there. At one of the community forums, we were asked to break it down by town so we could really see where the trends were happening for the enrollment projections. So in the next 3 years, Bowdoin Central School is projected to decline by 53 students. Bowdenham Community School is projected to decline by 12. Harpswell is projected to increase by 2. Williams Cone is projected to decline by 20, and Woodside is projected to decline by 42 students. So again, that's approximately 125 students in 3 years. Possibly, if we look out at the 10 years, almost 150 in the next 10 years. So looking at your 5 school, the capacity of the 5 schools, the elementary schools, it's 1,242 is your current population. Sorry, capacity of the current 5 schools, capacity is 1,242. Your current population is just over 1,000. So you're utilizing 80% of your capacity right now. And with the decline that is projected, you'll start to see that utilization goes down to, you're utilizing 70% and then 69% of those buildings. And then on the right is just some text from the enrollment projections and detailed data. So we're graphic people. We like to see things in pictures. Sometimes it's easier to understand. So what this looks at is the remaining capacity. So you're looking at your, the calculated capacity is the big number in yellow. Projected high enrollments, when we look at the enrollment projections, we don't just go to the year 3 or year 10. What is that highest number in there? Because you have to plan for all the students you're going to end up thinking you're going to have in that time period. You don't want to plan for less. So we pick the highest projected enrollment number for each of these. And then the yellow shows that that's how much room the students take up. The green is the remaining capacity shown in a pie chart for each of the schools. So on this slide, you're seeing that Harpswell has the least amount of capacity. Bowdoin, Ham, and Williams Cone have greater capacity, remaining capacity, I should say. Here, you can see that Mount Ararat Middle School has quite a bit of capacity, and then Woodside Elementary. All right, so that is crash course on a lot of data that took a long time to pull together, but those are kind of the facts where you can start to see the needs of the facilities, the programmatic needs, and then what is happening with your projected enrollment and your capacity within the existing buildings. So we start to look at, we already have the line by line recommendations of things that you need to start repairing on a critical time period or a long time period if everything were just to continue as is. But we need to look at the bigger picture. We need to look at how to best utilize your facilities long term. So that's where these options start to look at. What is some considerations for the best use of the facilities going forward? And these really look at the elementary schools, as you can tell from the data, some of the areas we really need to lean into. And this is probably really overwhelming at first, but what this is are all the options that came forward for consideration. Walk you through how to read this. At the top, you'll see numbers, so B1, B2, so on and so forth. That is the number we have given the option. Down the left-hand side, you will see in blue the existing school. So it just gives you kind of the abbreviation we've used and the name of the school. And then if we are considering a new school, it will be in green. We also provided the years of the schools next to them, just so you have that context. And then we looked at different considerations in each of these options. So B1, for example, really just looks at renovations happening at several of the schools to improve the facilities, and then at 2 of the schools addressing just the capital improvement items that are needed. I'm going to walk you through some detail on some of these options, but I'm going to do very high level right now. And you'll see that through the community engagement process and the feedback we got from everyone, the facility committee was able to really shorten this list from, I think it's 12 to 5. And you can see, maybe you can't see, let me move this on the bottom here. Along the bottom is the community priorities from the community forum. So we got a lot of feedback from them on how they prioritize these. So 1 being the highest priority. And then I think there's a couple ties for some of them, but like 11 is the lowest priority. So you can see their feedback on the bottom. I'll walk through them quickly. B2 looked at, again, addressing the capital improvement needs. It looked at doing some major renovations at Bowdoin, Ham, and Harpswell. And then it looked at removing the cone portion of Williams Cone and redoing the front of the site and constructing a new addition at the rear of the property. B3 looks at major renovations, again, at Bowdoin, Ham, and Harpswell, addressing CIP at Bowdoin and Woodside, and then constructing a new school to replace Williams Cone. C1 looks at addressing the CIP items at Bowdoin. It looks at major renovations at Bowdoin, Ham, and Harpswell. It looks at closing Williams Cone and constructing an addition at Woodside Elementary to house those students. And I'll pause here for a minute. Some of the things that we're looking, when we think about future plans for a school, it's looking at the condition, how much work that needs to go into a building, how much effort it is to bring it up to a certain point. And sometimes it is, when you look at the cost of doing that, sometimes building new is more beneficial because you can reset the clock on all of those systems within that building. And therefore you have now a newer building that won't need to be addressed for a certain period of time and allows you to then start to chip away at some of these other buildings. So just wanted to kind of pause and explain that for a second. The other thing with, I'll use the word consolidation, so going from the number of schools you have now to fewer schools, there are a lot more efficiencies in delivering of education, as well as running the building. And so just different things you think about, the fewer buildings in your portfolio, the less it costs to run these facilities, both from a staffing standpoint, an operational standpoint, utility standpoint. I was at C2. And again, these are all just for consideration. We did these to get feedback. They have their different merits for sure. C2 addresses CIP items at Bowdoin, major renovations at Bowdenham. This looks at closing Harpswell and Williams Cone and constructing a new addition at Woodside to house those students. D1 addresses CIP items at Bowdoin. It closes Bowdenham. It also closes Williams Cone. And it creates a new school for those two schools. It does a major renovation at Harpswell and addresses CIP at Woodside. D2 addresses CIP items at Bowdoin. It closes Bowdenham, Harpswell, and Williams Cone and creates a new school for those three, for the population of those three schools, and then addresses CIP items at Woodside. E1, Bowdenham moves to an addition at Bowdoin and close Bowdenham. You close Harpswell and move to an addition at Woodside, and you close Williams Cone and move it to an addition at Woodside as well. E2, Bowdenham moves to an addition. Bowdenham moves to an addition at Bowdoin. Harpswell has major renovations. Williams Cone closes and moves to an addition at Woodside. F1, major renovations at both Bowdoin and Bowdenham. It closes Woodside. It closes Williams Cone. It closes Harpswell. It closes Williams Cone and creates a addition at Woodside. F2, Bowdenham moves to an addition at Bowdoin. Major renovations happening at Harpswell. Construct a new school at Williams Cone and address CIP items at Woodside. And F3, address CIP items at Bowdoin. Let me move this here. Major renovations at Bowdenham, major renovations at Harpswell, and then we would close Williams Cone and Woodside and construct a new school. So you have one school in Topsom. So those were the different options. We went through the different considerations with the community. We had Post-it paper around the room. They gave us sticky note comments back on all these. Actually, some of these options came from some of that community feedback. Through the different rounds of community feedback, through the conversations with the facility committee, they took those 12 and said, we think these 5 address what we have heard from the community, address the data, and have the potential to be a long-term solution for the district. And that's kind of where they said, but now we need feedback from the committee. What these 5 do is they renovate. Option B1 renovates all the existing schools. Options that are being considered further all retain at least one elementary school in each of the 4 towns. We heard that very, very clear. It was a desire of the communities. Options that close schools in at least one of the 3 surrounding towns have been eliminated. And the selection is consistent with the community sentiments expressed at the public forum.
Go back. Okay.
I'm looking at the. In the existing column, what is construct new school at the base of it?
It's just a legend.
Okay,
Yeah, so,
okay.
yeah. So we needed to also look at the program considerations. So we had the information about the needs of the facilities. We need to think about the program considerations. So this is kind of a laundry list of different considerations that you'll see articulated in these options, because we're going to show you a more detailed view of each of the 5. So approximate adds for consideration to address program deficiencies indicated at the elementary. So providing playground fencing, pre-K, enlarged pre-K classroom and storage at Bodenham, music room with support, teacher collaboration space, single user restrooms. They needed a pre-K classroom, a kitchen with a stove and FLS, storage. We're looking at creating a separate cafeteria with addressing the need for some of the issues with the kitchen. And then looking at insufficient parking. Harpswell classrooms 1 to 5 will be replaced in a planned addition as one of the options you'll see. Multi-purpose room storage is needed, dedicated OT-PT room, or rooms, psych office, principal office, also creating a separate gym cafeteria. Williams Cone, general and library storage needed, staff restrooms, OT and PT spaces, several specialist spaces are needed, and then a kiln for the art room, and then Woodside storage, FLS kitchen, and a dedicated server room. So when we look at these options, they're going to be B1. We have itemized all of the repairs items that were identified in the CIP items from all of the recommendations we did. And then the programmatic cost that we just talked about is down below. So this really talks about let me move this little thing on here so people can see. This really starts to look at the cost that is needed to address, whether it be the CIP or some of the expansion that is, not expansion, major renovations that are happening at these schools, as well as addressing the programmatic needs at these schools based on this option. So you can see, and these are rough order magnitude costs, but you can see the range at the bottom. It's around 81 to 97 million to essentially address the needs within these 5 schools and address the programmatic needs. We were asked last time as a point of reference to give what it would cost to replace any of these schools. So on the right-hand side, we have just a rough order of magnitude based on the enrollment of each of these schools and some rule of thumb. So, and this would be considering replacing it on its existing site, not buying a new site. Harpswell, to replace Harpswell would be approximately 20 million plus or minus. To replace Williams Cone is about 28 million plus or minus. Bowden is 22 million plus or minus. Bodenham's 25 million plus or minus, and Woodside is 35 plus or minus. So just, it gives you that context as you start to look at some of these values of how much you'd be investing in some of the repairs, plus the programmatic. The question starts to raise, do you invest that money in repairing the building, or is one a consideration to replace some? So again, just a data point. This just further explains what the option is. It addresses some of the major issues at your older buildings in B1. It does not offer the benefits of consolidation. What did we hear from the community? Some felt this kicked the can down the road. There's a desire to have more detail on major renovations, which we'd have to dig out the information and provide that, which we can in forthcoming meetings. Would investments in short-term objectives at the schools be in the final proposal, especially where AC is needed? So there's a lot of mention about AC. Some felt in the short term, this would be a good option as you get more community feedback and can figure out the long-term option. Questions about if AC is included, commentary about it maintains the character of the district, less traumatic impact, it invests in the smaller community schools, and some felt it's expensive, but to them it was the best option. Here's B2. So the major difference here is we're removing that cone portion of the building. Steve, you want to talk a little bit about why it makes sense to remove that?
The cone portion of Williams Cone is the piece to the round piece to the right. And there are a number of issues with the building that there's no insulation on that envelope. The roof is bad. There's egress issues through that glass stairway in the middle. There's the ramp that connects that back to the other part of the school, which is really long and inefficient. So instead of investing money to repair all the needs in that portion, it would make a lot of sense just to build a new addition out back, tear that building down, and that gives you the added advantage of giving you more room in the front piece of that parcel so you could improve the bus and parent drop-off space and parking, which is really difficult to access at the rear.
So that's the major difference here with B2. It addresses that. So then you're seeing the rough order magnitude range from about 91 to 108 million in this option. B2, again, does the major renovations at Bodenham and Harpswell, and then at Williams Cone, it removes the cone portion, it redoes the front of the site and constructs a new addition at the rear of the property. It addresses major issues at the older building, it replaces the cone, but it does not benefit from it does not offer benefits of consolidation. What did we hear from the community? B options are all penny wise and pound foolish, was the sentiment of some. In the long term, B2 or B3, they weren't in support of closing community schools. Another comment about community schools are the heart of the community. So you're really seeing the sentiment that we heard over and over from the community about this. There was a question about the cone being the newest part. I think Steve did a great job of explaining why that is an area to look at replacing. There was a comment about Bodenham's location, has an exceptional access to outdoor learning, Red Rose Preserve. There was a question about could we build a second floor on top of the Williams wing? The answer is never no. It is very cost prohibitive to do that. So a lot of people want to know, well, can we just build right on top? Well, sometimes if it has been built recently and the architects and engineers have designed the top of that building to receive an additional floor, it most likely can be done. But the challenge we find is building codes change and things like that. At the time this was built, it's long enough now that the building codes have changed long enough, even if it was planned that way, that you would actually have to build an exoskeleton up around the building and then create another floor above and then build over top of it. So you're essentially rebuilding structural walls up out of the ground. So that's the foundation, all of that it's cost prohibitive. It can be done, but is not an economical way to address the need. Topsom is growing and Williams Cone can't go away, just renovate. We noted that the projections don't support that comment, as we saw. In Bodenham, there is space adjacent to the school on town-owned athletic fields if a new building is needed. You'll see some of the diagrams later that start to identify some of that space. So B3, the difference here is now we are building a new Williams Cone and replacing that on its site. This would be 92 to about 109 million for the total projects that's addressing all those needs. So again, the major difference here is Cone is being replaced. It addresses the older buildings. It replaces the Williams Cone building, which, as we saw, had a lot of need. It doesn't offer the benefits of consolidation. A lot of these address several programmatic needs. It may require a new site. Existing site access is not ideal, and we'll show that in a minute. Considerations from the forum: recommend close Williams Cone, build new elementary school. What happens to the Williams Cone lot? So if you were to close any of these buildings, that's a conversation that needs to be had. That's not something that's part of this study because it's beyond any control that we have, but definitely a conversation you guys want to have. Addition on Williams Cone and B2, B3 demolish Cone or new Williams Cone, 700 kids is too big. Williams Cone and So the two schools together. So those two schools, let's see, Williams Cone and Woodside, it says, but I think they were referring to another option that combined a lot more kids. The sentiment is 700 kids is too much from the community member. But note, if we took Williams Cone and Woodside and we combine those together, it's more about 500. It's a little less than 500. So it's not necessarily 700. So I think there's a little confusion in those numbers when that comment came in. B3 retains community schools and gives a fresh start for Williams Cone. Comment, we may need to self-fund a new school to plan for new schools every 10 years. So I think the person's sentiment was think about locally investing in a new school and start to set up a plan to kind of do major, whether it's needs or replacements of schools in the years to come. B3, they didn't think it was a good option. Thompson has two schools, so I think advocating that that's not where the focus is. And then new option came forward in that forum, renovate Bodenham, close school with lowest attendance, combine Williams Cone and Woodside, which is a option that comes up later on. C1, so this is the same except for now Williams Cone closes and we're constructing an addition at Woodside. So about 91 to 107 million for that. So pretty much the same sentiments, except now we are closing one school. So we do see that consolidation. Thompson has two community schools. It brings it down to one. So we still retain a community school in each of the communities. Some felt that combining the two schools would be a lot of kids. It's just shy of 500 kids based on the projections. They talked about a new option for, let's see, WC Build New in Topsom. So that's essentially combining those two and creating a new school, which we have data on later on. Seems like a workable option. Their design would have to maintain small school feel. So I think the sentiment there is, if you've ever seen the model of schools within a school, so what you can essentially do is almost create, whether it be wings or different areas to kind of create communities, multiple communities within a school. So you bring down the scale and the feel of I will say that 500 students is more typical of what we see in a lot of communities. You guys have more of like a 200 student range. So you could break the school into more 200, 250 size two schools within one to bring down that scale. C1 or C2, or sorry, C1 seems the most practical approach to the financial constraints we face. It conquers more. C1 or C2, could the addition be built without impact to instruction? Yes, it could. That happens quite a bit where we'll build the addition and then be able to move the students in after the addition is done. A plea to not close Williams Cone. Community member felt it's, or advocated that they have a very special community. It would be heartbreaking to lose it. C1, I believe consolidating the schools in Topsom is the best idea. Last but not least, option F3. So you heard different folks advocating. This was an option that essentially came through conversations. We heard it a little bit in the forum. It became a conversation within the facilities committee to come forward as an option as well. So the difference here is now Williams Cone closes, Woodside Elementary closes, and we build a new school for those two populations in Topsom. This is 104 to about 120 million, assuming we use the Woodside site and not do a new site. And I keep saying reuse of site because when we start to talk about a new site, it just is additional costs that isn't considered in those numbers. Major renovations at Bodenham and Harpswell, construct a new addition. No, that's wrong. It's construct a new building and close Williams Cone and Woodside. So we'll correct that. I see it says C1. This maintains the local schools in the four communities and avoids the cost to address serious envelope issues at Woodside. So that was one of the things. There's envelope issues that have to be addressed at Woodside that if we replace the whole thing, we could provide a new envelope for that building. We don't, We did not have community feedback on this because it came after the community forums or as part of that community forum. So this is, again, the summary of all those options I just walked you through. I have the cost at the top. I have the community feedback at the bottom, or ranking at the bottom. These are site plans just to orient folks as to the different schools. So this is Bowdoin Central School. You can see the property line. We're missing a little bit of the site map over there, but essentially you can see the property line. It's about 57.8 acres. This is one of the schools, I think somebody had mentioned, is on the newer side. This is one where we'd be doing a lot of the CIP items addressed at this school. And we're just noting where the parking and playground is on this site. When we're talking about Bowdenham Community School, this is the property line in red. It is noted, a couple things that were noted from the community of the Red Rose Preserve that has great outdoor learning. There is also some fields it looks like are kind of shared between maybe town and school property. And so in one of the options, it looks at adding on a cafeteria, kitchen and storage addition to this school. And then major renovations as well. And then Harpswell Community School, couple things considered here. This would be kind of replacing that connector piece in the middle, creating a new cafeteria and classrooms where you see the green, and then a solution of looking at replacing this on its site. So it wasn't necessarily part of one of the options, but we gave you that data point of, again, thinking about the amount of investment you would have to put into that school. What is that kind of return on investment? Does it make sense to build new? So for consideration. Williams Cone, so in B2, this kind of illustrates the removal of the cone and the addition being put on here. One of the concerns that a lot of people have had with this site is the access. There's really only one way in, one way out, and there's really no good place to make another access point on this site. And then this is same site, same concerns, but just looking at if you were to rebuild Woodside on its existing site. And then we're looking at, this is Woodside, and this is looking at putting an addition to house Williams Cone students. And these are all very diagrammatic, but the idea that you would have an addition to house the total number of students. There's one way in, there's the multiple ways in and out of this site. We're continuing to look at, are there other ways in and out of this site over to the page left as well. There's other property over there. We did look at the power line easement corridor. I don't know that the company, the power line company would welcome us putting a road on there, but also the way the poles are laid out, it looks like we would have to be on either side, one way on one side, one way on the other. So again, we're looking at all of these to see, are there ways to improve access to any of these sites, to address some of the other items in regards to circulation and traffic. And then this would be consideration if you're to build a new school here. You essentially can build it out on that field and then remove the existing site and then convert that to bus and car drop off and parking. So summary of community feedback. We're almost there, I promise. Summary of community feedback, forum number 2, ranking and priorities. We did a survey or a poll with those in attendance and asked them how they would rank the different priorities. And you can see the priority order they put these in. Safety and security was a big one, energy efficiency and minimize cost impact. There wasn't a lot of interest in reducing the number of existing schools to save costs, as we heard throughout. This is the priority ranking, Forum 2. We did not have cost. Forum 3, we asked them for their feedback again without cost and then with cost to see if there was any difference. Really the top 5 didn't, even 6 didn't really move. So in general, there's opposition to closing community schools. I think that's the big takeaway from all of the community feedback. There was broad support for prioritizing renovations and maintenance of existing facilities over consolidation or new construction. And then participants requested through this process transparency regarding tax impact, timeline, decision-making process, as well as expanding communication and engagement opportunities. So this is definitely a conversation and a topic that the community cares a lot about. Overall, the feedback underscored a desire to keep community schools open, improve existing facilities responsibly, and ensure that educational impacts and local voices remain central to future decisions. So now we want your feedback. All right, so what we're going to do is similar to what we did in some of the community forums, is we would like to understand how you would prioritize these options, the 5 options that remain. And the idea is the number 1 would be your highest priority, number 5 would be your lowest. And this is a live poll, and we're going to engage in conversation after this, but this allows us to just get a read of the board. And we ask that just the board take this poll right now so that we can get the board feedback. We've already put this out to the community. And then try to get feedback from the board. If you guys want to then open it up to the community, we can do that as well. But really want board feedback so that the facility committee can hear from the board as to how you guys are prioritizing these and why. The way this works is, this is a software called Slido.com. You can do the QR code if you have a device. And then you can also type in Slido.com into your web browser. When you get there, type in that number if you're using your web browser, which is 2373-213. And then it will pop up on your screen, and you can pick them in the order of your prioritization, or you can select one and move it to the top. The first one you move up will be your highest priority. The second will be your second most, so on and so forth. And what we really just want to understand is, based on the information we've provided, based on the feedback you've heard from the community, what would you now prioritize for these different options? And then we're going to open it up to have a conversation about why. And we ask that you prioritize, you go and pick each one of them to put them in priority order. And as you can see, we've already got 2 folks that have submitted theirs. If anybody is having trouble entering the information, just raise your hand. We'll come around and help you. It can be finicky sometimes. Looks like you have a helper. How many board members do we have in attendance tonight? 12? Okay. So we got about 6. I know this is a lot to digest, so no pressure. Take your time to respond. I just want to make sure that I don't move on until we have everybody's input here. But this similar tool was used at, like I said, each of the community forums for the community to give us feedback on how they prioritized the options. And then we had some good open questions so they could give us more detailed information. And I know that the facilities committee really looked at that information as they narrowed down these options. And so you're providing another data point to the facilities committee so they can start to give us direction as to which one of these or which ones of these we want to dig in a little deeper to see if it's the right fit. It's really fun to watch the bars and watch everything jump around. All right. So my understanding is we have 12 board members here tonight. So based on the information that you have here, oh, we got one more, sorry. I think we have 12. Is somebody still working on theirs? All right. Based on, oh, we have 13. I think we have one extra person taking it. All right. Oh, maybe. I cannot. It's anonymous. Yep. Yeah, but they're not all board members. Steve's with us. All right. Well, I watched it before it moved. I think C1 was actually right behind B1, but they're all pretty close. So B1 is just beyond B2, and then C1 is behind B2. So really, the top three from the board we're seeing are option B1. So the idea of renovating Bodenham, Harpswell, and Williams Cone. Option B2, renovate Bodenham and Harpswell, renovate Williams and replace the cone. And then C1, renovate Bodenham and Harpswell and move Williams Cone to the Woodside addition. And then if I can get my mouse to work. The next one is option B3, renovate Bodenham and Harpswell, replace Williams Cone on its site. And then F3, renovate Bodenham and Harpswell, construct a new school to replace Williams Cone and Woodside. Now we have 15, so I'm not quite sure what's happening. So I'm gonna move on to the next slide. I do ask that only board members take the poll. So if folks at home are taking it, please ask that you don't take the poll. This is for board member feedback, so that the facilities committee has their voice. We have asked very similar questions to the community already. So what we want to understand now is we saw the results of where the group of folks on the board feel the top priorities are. We'd like to understand, and this can be an open conversation, you guys can enter it up here, but we'd really like folks to be able to give us information as to why. Why is one a higher priority, one of the options a higher priority for you than maybe some of the others? And what information do you want the facilities committee to have as they start to narrow down these options? So I really just open it up to all of you for conversation, or please feel free to enter it here. And it's a good way to also record it as well. So I'll wait to see if anybody enters, but if anybody wants to speak up, by all means, please do. You have a hand.
Yeah,
I'm a faster talker than I am a typist. First off, my feedback is thank you. The amount of data and structure this presentation alone has given us is pretty out of this world. So thank you
Absolutely.
for getting us here. My two primary responses are, first, I would like us to think about when we're opening up a school being smart. And so I actually ranked the replacement options, I think, higher than the rest of the board did. And I'll say that only because I think that if we're going to open up a building, we should think, are we going to get more long-term bang out of our buck if we're replacing a building? So potentially replacing the cone, replacing Williams Cone. I think those are worthwhile considerations because I think you guys use the term resetting the clock.
Mm-hmm.
That resets the clock a lot. Like just renovating Williams Cone will not give us the same, especially given like what we've been hearing about the cone's deficiencies specifically, right? So I think we want to make sure we're thinking about, that extra, it was like 10% more, I want to say. It was like 90 million to 100 million roughly, in some of those options. Does that 10% get us another 10 years, which is essentially, 33% longevity, you know what I mean? Like thinking about like what that is. And all the answers aren't in this presentation. I think the facilities committee will have questions to ask to drill down. But from my perspective, I guess I would sort of say, like really identifying, for committing to these community schools, which is clear that we are, should we really consider some replacement within that framework to make sure that the money is being spent as intelligently as possible, knowing it's a little bit more right now, but will be saving us money in the next 20 to 30 years. So I said there were two thoughts. That's really the one. That's what I got.
Thank you.
yeah, Andy.
It's interesting you got there, Hudson, because I think the facilities committee has been, talking about similar themes along that line, like, well, what would another 2 million get us at this site, and Harpswell was one of those schools that kind of jumped right up, like, well, if we're going to put all the money into renovating the most difficult space in Harpswell, what would a new school cost instead of renovating that space? So, that was, part of the evaluation as well. And Lisa didn't cover that option necessarily here, but I think that answers, can we get more bang for our buck and reset the clock? And those are absolutely a yes in certain scenarios.
I'll just share too, one other thing that jumps out to me in this, and I'm not advocating it for it at this point or anything, but seeing the utilization and the space at Montarac Middle School and what, if we were to look at shifting another grade into that building, what that would do to that utilization of that building, and then what it would shift for kind of programmatic space constraints, needs and things that what we determine to be the remaining buildings may soften, may change the costs associated with doing that. And again, I'm not in a point now where I'm saying that. It's just, that's one thing that continually jumps out at me when I've listened to this. It's like, well, we have this big building that we are doing a lot of work to that says it can handle more than it currently does. Do we need to be thinking about that too?
Yeah, we've also seen some districts that are in a similar situation, and you can look at, can a grade move in? And sometimes the answer is yes, sometimes it's no. And the other thing they look at are there programs that are maybe desired to be at the middle school that you don't have right now, that maybe you could think about how you're using some of those existing spaces to provide to the middle school students. That's another way to think about it as well. Oh, got all sorts of comments coming in here. That's great. Any other conversations that or questions folks want to have? I'll read through these too. All right, so seeing prioritize options that are least disruptive to learning. Absolutely. So I'll talk a little bit about that. Renovations are more disruptive than new builds. When we build new, we have the ability to be separate from the students. So just something to think about. If we're building an addition, it's not right where the students are. If we are building a new building on a site that a building already exists, it's separate. So those are actually the least disruptive. We can't wait for the state to propose changes, but to the extent possible, keep all options open for state funding and try to align our plans with what is more likely to get state funding. So what we're seeing from a state funding stance is they are advocating for consolidation. They don't let us build small schools anymore. And so that is what we're seeing from a state level. If you were to be on the major capital improvement, list, and you got high on that list, they're really going to make you look at how to best utilize your infrastructure. And we're seeing it through consolidation, and a lot of the projects in elementary schools that they fund are around that 300 to 500 student range, more towards the 500. So again, just something to think about. But by all means, we know the process very well. We know the state standards. We can, through whatever option you move forward with, identify different things. There are also ways to just think about, are there different things that we can be looking at some of these schools? Like we worked with Sean on a revolving renovation fund to be able to do some of the work through that process with the state. And we were just awarded that recently to address some of the bathroom needs in one of the schools. So that's another mechanism. As we look at any of these improvements at any of these buildings, that's something else we want to look at. Our communities have made it clear that we want all of our existing community schools. If it means new schools, I support that, but also open to renovations. I don't want closing any of these schools. Let me get my arrow over here. Oops, sorry. I'm trying to move down on my and not advance it. So definitely a sentiment we've heard. So thank you for sharing that. If the newer schools already have structural needs, how can those situations be addressed before new schools or major constructions begin? So I have to address that. So where it says not, the structural thing says not applicable. So essentially, we can't do a full structural analysis because we can't see all the structure. So we can only assess the things that we can physically see. So that's where it says not applicable across the board on there. The things that we can see, we can address, or if we see things that come up, we can, talk about, if we see cracking or things like that, but we don't have exposure to the full structural system to be able to do a full analysis. So that's why it says not applicable. It doesn't necessarily say that every building needs structural modifications. So I just wanted to clarify that if there was confusion around that. I don't think the projections are convincing. You show a slide that indicates 1990 to 2020 growth in the towns, with Bowdoin at 42% and Harpswell at 39%, but Harpswell in 2026 is at near capacity and Bowdoin is not. I looked it up, only 3-year projections are the most reliable in terms of future student growth. We're just going off the data that the NASDAQ had provided. So they are the go-to resource for doing these in New England. So that's the information that they had and the data that was provided. So further on this, I think same commenter, thus I carry more weight with having each community have its own community school. I think it's the most important factor. So a lot of advocating, what we've heard to date on keeping community schools. Any other feedback from the board on prioritization of maybe it's the options or maybe not even the options, but just information you want the committee to consider as they're moving forward with narrowing down the options here?
Sorry, one of the interesting statistics that I think came out of all the conversations was with Woodside School being one of the newer schools in this evaluation of community schools, it still needed $17 million worth of work. There was an envelope project in it that didn't even address all the programmatic enhancements and other needs. So that number alone just shocked me. So it makes trying to squash the two schools together a little more attractive financially. So that's just an observation. I'm not trying to steer a conversation, but.
If you're
I was going to spin off that. All right, thank you, Haley. I had a similar reaction to that, seeing that number for Woodside, which I'd been on the tours, I've seen the siding problems, but I didn't realize the degree to which that cost was so high. And is your sense that if we were to do a consolidated Topsom school, would that qualify for state funding and the major projects funding? Potentially. I mean, obviously, who knows until you submit an application, but is that more in line with like something that the state might be involved?
That's more in line with something that they would fund. The process is one to which you'd have to apply to the state.
Yeah.
They just finished up a round of applications. They're starting to fund the priority list. So it's going to be a couple of years before they come out with a new application for that. But that is more in alignment with what we're seeing them fund recently.
Thank you.
Yeah.
I was just wondering if at some point we could see a cost comparison of doing an exoskeleton on Williams Cone School versus like constructing a whole new school, like what the cost difference
Yeah,
is.
we can give you a rough order of magnitude on that. Yep. You're talking about the second story. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm on the facilities committee, but I'd be interested to hear people's thoughts about Williams Cone and Woodside coming together, whether it's with an addition, on one site, the addition would probably be at Woodside, or if it's a new school, either at the Woodside site, a different site, whatever. That seems to be like, there's a couple options that have some variation of that. right? And I'm just curious what people think about that from maybe even especially those from Topsom, but you know, how the communities might feel about that. I'm from Harpswell. We lost West Harpswell School a bunch of years ago. I had kids that went to that school. I've had kids that go to a lot of our elementary schools actually, but and it was a loss to the community, you know, to lose that school. At the end of the day, however, it all worked out okay, you know? And you know, that having one school in Harpswell now feels okay. It feels like it is one school that the whole town kind of rallies around. So I understand what that loss can feel like, but I also, you know, sort of experienced the other side of that. I now have a granddaughter at that school. So that's kind of cool too, but yeah.
I've had a lot of feedback from families at Williams Cone School. I'm on the PTA there also, and it's been a pretty general consensus that we don't want to consolidate Williams Cone with Woodside. And I think the allure of having two smaller community schools within Topsom brings a lot of people in. So I think that it would be a detriment to the town of Topsom, just based on the feedback that I've heard.
The board has had extensive conversations around use of facilities. And as we talk about the schools, we talk of them, all this conversation understandably is focused on the core academic responsibilities, the quote unquote, air quote, school responsibilities. Are you, as a company, are there any models of collaboration beyond, so that school becomes more than a school? And how that can be a shared space? Does that happen anywhere in Maine or even beyond?
Yeah, Portland Public Schools is a great example of that. They have two, we'll call them community schools that are one half school, one half community center. And so they have, the community has access to the gym. There's, and several of them, a pool, things like that. So it's essentially a shared resource. And one half is mostly through the town and the community center, and one half is by the school. You have to be very strategic in how to set that up from a safety and security standpoint. Other examples, not to that scale, would be, we've seen some more rural districts bring in a healthcare partner to create a health center for the community. So it's a place where people can go get vaccinations, sometimes dental, things like that. And part of it is supported that way. Other community resources we've seen are partnering with different technical programs or things like that to bring satellite programs in.
So I would imagine those examples would be in existing buildings. So because to move that forward through the DOE, the state funding model would be a complicated exercise.
Yes, and well, yes and no. So you would have to find a community partner. Some of the programs through the DOE right now, it's like a 9 through 16, right? And that's an example. I'm not saying you do that here, but they're looking at partnering with different universities and trades and things like that and creating a shared entity that way. But for the example of having a community center as part of that, you would essentially, the community center piece would have to pay for their portion of the building and the school would have to pay for theirs. So anytime you have different entities as part of it, it would be their cost, not the state's cost. So I think RSU 10 just built a pre-K through 8, CDS pre-K through 8. They have a community health center. They have a community fitness center. And so those are different components to that school as more of a community resource.
Right, but a formal collaboration.
Yep.
Yeah. I also think of the work, I'm on the cooperative board for Region 10.
Okay. Yeah.
And with significant needs on the structure, the list comes out and they move from, X to Y, but no closer to A.
Yeah.
So as we look at these numbers and think of it, it's not a sense of it happening tomorrow
Mhm.
to enter each one of these projects would need to move forward as an individual. And the chance of having a trifecta at the top of the list would be a long shot. So what's the reality in terms of timing? If the community were to say, yes, let's go with one of these selections.
Mhm. So a couple things. One, it depends on the funding, right? So if
Sure.
it's locally funded, I'll start there and then I'll go state funded. So if it's locally funded, and let's say you say, okay, let's go forward with this. There's a whole process. You'll have to get it to a referendum to get a vote by the taxpayers. And let's say it's successful. Then from there, we typically say it's about a 4 to 5 year process until that major project is completed. So depending on if it includes everything in that option, we'd have to look at, is it that time frame? But if you were to just, let's say, take a new school and build a new school, it's about from that referendum to the occupancy is 4 to 5 years.
Yeah.
If you're going state funded route, you need to wait for the next round of applications. And we all know there's lots of conversations at the state, all things are in flux right now, right? Based on what has happened to date, we have seen that it makes the most sense to apply for all of the schools. In the event one of them gets towards the top, that's when you can start really talking about this idea of different, elements of a program, if you will. And whether it's renovation additions to one or two, or whatever the case may be, what is the best solution moving forward? Then that's when we see multiple schools being able to be addressed. So again, it's a consolidation example, but an example I'm familiar with, RSU 10 just completed their school and moved in. They applied for 3 schools. One of them made it to number 3, so it got to move forward, but because those other 2 were on the list, they were able to look at a consolidation of those 3 as part of that project.
Thanks.
Yeah.
Yeah, Frank.
Yeah, to Bart, one of the things that we looked at when we were trying to figure out sort of the direction that looked like we should be headed in was to really analyze the age of the buildings and how that reflected what would seem to come up next in the pricing of all of this. And I will tell you that I went to Williams Cone the first year it was open as a first grader. And when I walked into that place, and my father was chair of the school board at the time, when we walked in there together, there was an evident odor of not of a new school, but of an old school in 1954. So I'm just giving that as a sort of a background piece. But what we were really looking at was the fact that Woodside is actually 33 years old. It's an old building already. And so that put the Topsom schools in a need basis. And yes, it's a long-term process that we're going to have to go through in order to get buildings, because there are other renovations that we need to take place. We have to address, in addition to all the elementary schools, we have to address building 376. We have to address the other buildings that are of similar age. And so it's important to kind of keep all that in the back of your mind, because we're not just talking about these 5 elementary schools. So that's a little backdrop as to how we came to where we're presently sort of situated, but with no decision made.
Yeah, building off of Frank's comment, has the facilities committee talked about what the potential renovation replacement options for 376 or transportation might be? And I ask about them together just because I feel like maybe the solution might be tackled jointly, but I just was curious if there's been any progress along those lines. It's not the marquee elementary school level, obviously, but just wondered.
Correct me if I'm wrong, facilities committee, but I would say no. We haven't really tackled costs on those. Like you've seen tonight, a lot of the big focus is what to do with our schools, so.
Any other comments before I move on to the next steps?
Yeah, Jessica.
Just a question. I remember when we were planning this school, there was a lot of talk. I was on the sustainability committee for this school. And we discussed the idea that schools were built for, 50-year buildings. We talked about this school being built as a 100-year building. One of your slides showed data from a few different sources on the right. Aging at 30 years and then escalating to 60 years is kind of a cap. If Mount Ararat is a 100-year building and we're going forward to, I assume, sustainability in that direction, I guess I'm just throwing that out there for consideration and as a question to you with some of the planning, some of the options. Are we thinking, how many years ahead are we going with at the time?
And that's a great comment. I'll go back to the data. Again, that's just a kind of benchmark. That was the 20 years more systems. So thinking about like some of the mechanical systems will age out, even in this building. If it's a 100-year building, they will need to be replaced in time. But when you're thinking with a new building, you can make certain decisions that can really think about this idea of, the longevity of how do we design this to be flexible? How do we design it so that different things can be easily replaced and we're not retiring the building, right? So that 60-year mark is again, more of a national average than it is you need to close your school at 60 years. When we're thinking about new builds, we're thinking about, we call them 75 to 100-year decisions, right? So some of the existing schools, we're working within the existing infrastructure. So they already are at a certain age. There's certain things that without replacing sections, we can't really impact with these renovations. So some of them will get you certain parts of the building a certain number of years, and others will have a lower impact or a higher impact depending on the options. So we can only really say with kind of a large addition or a new build, really, what is that number you're targeting?
All right, I'm going to ask this question kind of are the next steps from here? It sounds like the board has, and please somebody throw something at me or speak up, but the work that the facilities committee has done in narrowing it down to these 5 potential options, it feels like these address the concerns that we've heard from the community, and kind of everybody kind of speaking here seems like a solution may lie within these. Now, not identifying which one it is, but within these 5, that there may be a solution. And I feel like that's where the committee was before, wanting to know if it was at a point you could take the next steps from here with these 5 to maybe start to understand like what the cost impacts are over 30 years or something with each direction, so that we can layer that on in addition to the upfront costs. I'm not sure if there's a question in there or just a statement or not, but
I think you're
trying to lead us forward to it.
Summarize my next steps on this.
Okay, perfect.
So I think what you're getting at is the desire of the facilities committees to continue to narrow these down. And so we wanted more conversations with the boards. The idea is We're at 5. Can we continue to narrow it down to maybe 3 or 4? Because doing that analysis on 5 is a lot. And so if there's certain ones that can kind of fall off and we can focus on, are there 3 ideally? If we have to go to 4, look at that and start to really dig deeper and kick the tires more on those different options. Was kind of our thought as to the next steps, and you guys can all correct us if we're incorrect, but that will allow you to do a more formal analysis on those options, provide sort of a shortlist memo on the selection of those options and why. And then if you desire more community feedback, then that would be the time to do that. Or if you're ready to come forward, because ultimately the facilities committee needs to come forward to the board with a recommendation. And so really the facilities committee has to make sure you have all the information you need to make that recommendation. So we were thinking continue to narrow it down, then let us know what additional information you need to feel you're at a point to make that recommendation to come back to the board. And remembering for everybody that, I think the comment was made earlier, this isn't something that's happening overnight. It's not like a recommendation is made and then tomorrow, something happens to these schools. Again, this is a master plan. So we're talking about short-term, midterm, long-term. So there are going to be things that need to be addressed at some of these schools really soon and need to, probably Sean probably already has many of them in the budget for the school. So part of it is once that recommendation is made, then it's putting together that, okay, here's the implementation of that recommendation. But yeah, so those, I think we're in an
You
alignment.
said it much more clearly. Thank you. But yeah, I think we're in
Absolutely.
the same space. So, and from here, the committee can do a little bit more work and help
Yeah.
reach that point.
And I think Heidi had done a good job of kind of just, there's a lot of questions on like next steps from there and kind of where it goes at the end of this presentation, and some may have it in their hands. She had kind of outlined phases 1, 2, 3, and 4. We're really in that phase 1 of like determining what this option is. And then it's really looking at from there, where does it go? Do options come forward to the community for a referendum or things like that? And so you'll see this in the back of the presentation. And how that is intended to move forward. So that is the end of our presentation.
So just, responding to your comment about like helping the facilities committee narrow down from 5 to maybe 3, I can't help but want to throw an idea to you guys. This is just one person's idea. We're not voting on anything tonight. I would say that the ones to look at are B1, B3, and F3, because they're like idealized versions of each one. Pure renovation, replacing Williams Cone on site, consolidating Topsom. I think if you look at 3, those are the 3 to look at. One man's opinion, you guys will talk and discuss, but I just thought I'd throw that out there, looking at the 5. If that's hurtful, I apologize. My intent is not to be helpful.
And there will be facilities committee meetings where that can be discussed and shared and coming up. So, yeah, Sean.
I just want to make a quick comment for the group, if I may. When we speak about project planning and capital improvements in the short term, I will say that I do struggle a bit with that, because we haven't really formalized a decision or a vision as far as what we want to do with some of these aging buildings, which in my opinion, and I would say everybody can agree with this, we want to be responsible with our money, make sure that we're investing and spending capital funds responsibly and wisely. So I just want to say for the group, I think it's important to keep working towards a vision and a unified decision as to what we're going to do with some of these aging buildings, to make sure that we're just being responsible with our capital funds. So, thank you.
Ryan, if I could just piggyback on that real quick. When I first came on the board a few years ago, our capital improvements budget was about $300,000. It's now what are we budgeting for this coming year? Closer to 6. How much is our capital improvements? Like if we were just to do like the CIP on all the buildings, it's tens of millions of dollars, right? We're not going to get there by picking away annually with $500,000-$600,000 or even $1 million. It's not going to happen. We're going to end up with such an enormous amount of deferred maintenance that we're going to be forced into certain corners we don't want to be in. And, and to Sean's point, we're going to be spending, a bunch of money fixing things on buildings that then ultimately, need a new transmission or a whole new engine rebuild, right? And it's not worth doing at that point. So we've got to move in the direction of trying to get where are we headed? And we have to come, as a board, and I think as a community, we have to realize that we're not going to get away with spending $500,000 a year on capital improvements.
All right. Seeing any more comments quick, and we'll get some public comment after. No, all right. Thank you, Lisa and Steve, both. This was great information and great discussion, so thank you very much.
Absolutely.
We do have our sign up if you want to make public comment. If you haven't signed up but you want to, please just come up and do so. But we will go ahead and start that now. It looks like first we have Dorian Taylor. And when you do come up, just please give us your name and your town and residence.
My name is Dorian Taylor. I live in Orr's Island down in Harpswell. And the presentation was very good tonight. Thank you very much for that. But I need you guys to kind of keep some things in mind while doing the whole process of going through this. Keep in mind, this is a high-level evaluation that's been done. So these estimates that are done could go up, they could go down. It all depends what happens when they go to the structural testing, the environmental testing, and the other things that are going to have to occur at some point to get a factual thing on the numbers. Over the years, I've seen a lot of schools consolidate. I've seen some renovate old buildings. I know the pros and cons of both. The numbers they did go at, the 60 mark, the 30 mark, all that. It is for the internal structures of the building. The buildings themselves, I've seen buildings that are hundreds of years old that are still active today, just by the upkeep they have to do. So just because a building's old doesn't mean it's necessarily done. Keep that in mind. The other thing you have is we're a very unique situation. You have 4 towns that aren't very close together. We're pretty spread out. A lot of the towns that have an easier time consolidating, it's 1 town or 2 towns. And like example, Harpswell, we closed an elementary school, but we still had an elementary school. That eased the burden of losing an elementary school from a town. When you're a town, you lose your elementary school completely. That's a whole different scenario of worries. When you're a town like Portland, who is able to consolidate, but it's Portland, that's 1 city. Therefore, you're going to have the same thing. You have the same political message. You have the same people living there. They all have a reason to be there. When you have 4 separate towns like we do, Bodenham, Bowden, Harpswell, Topsham, that's 4 different political aspects, 4 different mindsets of 4 different communities. What happens a lot of the time when you have a situation like that, doesn't always, is you have very different opinions colliding with each other, which can lead to some political arguments and some very big issues for the school. Can actually raise pupil costs, it can raise administration costs, just dealing with all the different issues you have to deal with. So yes, expenses come into play, but there's many other aspects that come into play at this point. The leftover buildings. Let's say we do decide to close the buildings and build a new building, consolidate. You have leftover buildings that need to be dealt with, demoed or upkeep, and that costs money additional. At the same time, because you have consolidated and gone through the state, you're going to start losing funding to keep those older buildings going. Therefore, it's going to be more up to the towns, which would be put more of a burden on the towns to keep those buildings going until they actually bring them down. Population cycle. It's great that we have the populations over the next 3 years, but that's not a guarantee. Harpswell, I live in Harpswell right now, and though everyone's shocked that we have 2 second grades, we have 2 first grades, we're going to have 2 kindergartens now. For years, that was nothing, but it all goes through cycles, as we all know. Populations leave, they come and they go, it grows. Logistical problems can be another issue. Again, we're towns very far apart from each other. That's going to add logistical issues to getting everyone around. Some people are going to have to get their kids up earlier now to get over to the school, or longer drives for the kids. At a high school, it's not so much of an issue, but at elementary level, that can be a huge issue with the kids. What else? Other, I guess those are some of the main concerns I've seen over the years. I've done work for the Archdiocese of Boston, the Boston Community Schools, Worcester Schools, North Middlesex, some schools in Maine, some in New Hampshire. I've seen them all try different methods. The schools that successfully consolidate are either next to each other or the same town. The schools that have harder issues with it are schools that are further away. And the other thing is, just because a building's old doesn't mean it's over. I've seen plenty of buildings that are very, very old, but because, yes, you have to replace the boilers and you have to replace the lights and the basic things have to be replaced. But you replace those things, the building itself, the structure, the skeletal structure still is good. And until a structural engineering is done in the building, we can't just say that the building needs to be closed. It may have some cracks and stuff, but that may not be structural. That may be cosmetic until more studies are done. So keep in mind, this is a high-level evaluation that was done. It doesn't necessarily mean that the estimates we got are going to be the estimates that we end up having to deal with. And that's all I have to say for now. Thank you.
Thank you, Dorian. Next on the list, we have George. And maybe George had to leave early. Yes. Thank you. So Ryan Holmes.
Good evening, folks. Ryan Holmes from Topsom. Thank you in advance for allowing me to run through my jaggedy notes from this evening. One of the things that I wanted to start with was the idea of the process of our budget that's continuing in addition to what we're proposing for this evening, and to offer an even further zoomed out lens, because we as towns are comprised of many different budgets, the school budget being one of them. If we look at our budgets that have happened over the past 3 years, and we continue those out over the next 6 years, with the current rates of increases, and this is without capital improvements, our school budget gets closer to $100 million than 50. We're going to be in the 90s. That's without any capital improvements. Proposing capital improvements, that's going to throw a monkey wrench in. I think there's a lot of conversation surrounding that right now. Another layer to this onion, however, is I also serve on the county or the budget advisory committee for the county. They're also throwing in 10 to 15 to 18% budget increases year to year to year, and this year is going to be no different. We're looking at new sheriff's cells and buildings for the county, as well as all of the other things. And each of the towns in our, except for Harpswell, are part of the Saginaw County. Harpswell is a part of the Cumberland, and they have to pay their portion there. We have the regional vocation school, Region 10. Their enrollment is increasing drastically, and they're looking for ways to improve their programming. The town itself in Topsom, and I can only speak for Topsom as that's where I live, the town budget has marginally gone up in overall. It's been about a 3 to 4% increase over the past 3 years. That's not going to be the case coming up. We have a lot of new things happening in the town of Topsom, from apartment buildings to the idea of bringing water and sewer over to the other side of the highway. And I can assure you taxes are going to go up there, because as taller buildings come, so do the need for bigger fire trucks and taller ladders for all of the infrastructure that's going to be created. A greater amount of public safety is going to be needed, virtually doubling the teams and systems that we have. It's not like we're hiring one more paramedic. We have to hire an entire team of paramedics to fit the shift for the expansion. So the concern that I bring up is not just to complain. It's to point out the idea that in Topsom, the school budget is 60% of our property taxes. Over the next 6 years, if we continue on the same trend of budget increases, it's going to go up to 70 or 72% of our overall taxes. And that is including the county taxes and everything else. So I know we talk a lot about taxpayers and trying to be kind to the taxpayer. That's a real hard thing to do right now. And God bless you guys for being in these seats, because I do think tough decisions are before you. And I say that because what I'm looking at is numbers going up year after year after year after year, and that's not sustainable. At some point, cuts are going to be necessary, and very tough decisions are going to need to be made in order to fund the school systems and the public safety and all of the other things that taxpayers pay. A hard sell right now that I'm hearing as a select board member in Topsom is the fact that we do have declining enrollment. It's clearly our housing market is strapped. The prices of our homes have gone up and doubled or even more so. Property taxes have done the same over the 5 years. It's very evident we are not attracting young families into our town. One of the things, not everything, but one of the selling points of a new high school was that new schools bring in young families, but young families can't afford to live here. And it's going to be a vicious circle when taxes just keep increasing to support our community and our children, and it drives taxes so far up that it brings the young families out of reach, because there is an instability and balance with affordable housing. And I don't think that's unique to Topsom. I think that serves across all of our communities. So with that, the comment really is we have the next 5 years, I think, are going to be imperative for our communities, more so than they've ever been. The high school is bonded, and it's going to be, we're making payments on that for a while. If we're looking at other bonds or other methods of payments for some of these taxes, it's just, putting it out even further. But we do have some large increases coming our way, to a point where I dare say that, you may have a revolt of sorts, not in the form of yelling and screaming, but people voting no. And that goes across the board for counties and towns and schools and across the board. At some point, it's just not going to be affordable anymore. I think we're getting over the next 5 years to that point. So we have to be very deliberate in our short, medium, and long-term planning, especially for the capital improvements that we're proposing tonight. I also think that collaborating deeper with the county and with the towns is something that is necessary to show the support. Because one of the hard things is the community outreach from a school district typically goes to the families of people that have kids in the school district. Rarely does that message get out to the surrounding communities. It's a hard task. I know that. I'd love to see 1,000 people at select board meetings. They just don't come. Town participation is at a low, but we have a town meeting structure in our government for the towns. It's important that we start getting more community members involved, and more so than just members that have kids in this school. We do have a lot of professional individuals in our community that have served in many different roles that could be beneficial to what we're trying to accomplish. And I think reaching out to finding ways to reach out more than just to the members, the families of the students in our school. Those are some things that we can do to collaborate a little bit further, but to keep an eye on the project over this, I would call it an intermediate period of time, is going to be, I think, critical. Thank you, guys.
Thanks, Ryan. Matt Gilley.
Matt Gilley. I'm from Harpswell. I'm actually one of the select board members there as well. And Harpswell is, I can almost just mirror what Ryan just said. We're facing some of the same problems in Harpswell. Our town budget's going up by 4.5%. Our county budget's about to increase by 21%. And the school budget's going to follow that route. But I'm going to kind of take a different shot at this. I'm a firm believer in buy once, cry once. If you're going to do something, do it right the first time, and don't just kind of put Band-Aids on it. And I did some simple math. And when you look at on that little box you had for school replacement, if you replaced all the elementary schools, you're less than $10 million above option F3. And then that's including rebuilding Woodside and Williams Cone. So I'm sure you could shave a couple million off of that by building one bigger school and combining those two. So why are we not looking? I mean, that seems like the best bang for our buck, because that gets us, like this lady here was saying, that gets us 4 or 5 brand new schools that we hopefully don't have to do any improvements in for 20 years until some systems have to be replaced. Furthermore on that, We have a brand new high school here that's about 5 or 6 years old, and I'm assuming when we built it, we had those 3-year student projections, so we're 2 years beyond that and we're at capacity. Like, how does that work? You know what I mean? Like, we need to do better planning. Like, and this school needs around $1 million in repairs. That's kind of what makes me nervous as a taxpayer. We're looking at something that's around 5 years old, needs hundreds of thousands of dollars in repair, and is already at capacity. So if we do look at building new schools, I think we need to plan. Even though I do agree with Ryan, everything does say decline. I'm optimistic in hopes that at some point that trend shifts, and we start to see some more young people move into this area. But that's not necessarily a guarantee. I just like, if we're going to spend millions of dollars, I'd like to see us do it once in our lifetimes and not 2 or 3 times. Thank you.
Thank you, Matt. Jim Byrne?
Jim Byrne, Topsom. I have my gym outfit on today, so I didn't dress up for this. But I do have my Patriots jersey on, and I'm very hopeful for next season. I just think this was a fantastic presentation. I really commend you, and it was very helpful. I've just read a little bit about it. I haven't given any input yet, but it really, truly, and I appreciate that it really spells out the problem. It does its job and then some. And, just a few comments, and I agree with a lot of what was said tonight from the other folks that spoke and the select board. And obviously we are in a situation that, that's been delayed and delayed and delayed, and you can understand why with what's been happening. But ultimately, we just have to face it. I am also in agreement with looking at, and obviously we're building for 80 years. So to put a Band-Aid on something, I agree. I think we have to look really far out here and find some way to make that work. I think we're dealing with maybe some escalating inflation. I think that's what we're hearing. And counterintuitively, the way to deal with escalating inflation is to buy as much as you can now, and that includes maybe new schools. And that way you can possibly spread the bonds out, and then money in the future, it's different. It's worth more now. So I think that's something that the board should consider. I like the discussion about partnerships, and I recognize that if you do, I know Topsom was looking at a community center. It is in some ways separate, but if there's any way that you can collaborate with some other type of community resource or organization, there may be opportunity there. Obviously, it adds more complexity, and sometimes that may not be exactly the best approach, but certainly something to kind of think about. And then I think ultimately it all comes back to your mission. What are we trying to do? We're trying to educate our kids, and the buildings just kind of support that. So you really need a critical mass of kids in a school in order for you to have the best education that you can prepare. I think it's part of the reason why schools get closed. There just aren't enough kids to, you start having a K-1, 2 type program, and ultimately if that was the most effective way to teach kids, then every single school would have that. We wouldn't have K-1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And to think about it as a way to, I was on the Technology Learning Commons Committee, and one of the things that we did with the Learning Commons was we thought about even just the space in there and how the books can move around. And so try to plan maybe for some flexibility. Is there opportunity to plan for, it's hard to predict the future, but in 10 years, if a school needs to get smaller or to change or to switch grades around, is there a way to do that with what you're seeing now? And certainly it adds a lot of complexity, but to kind of think a little bit differently about this, and it might open up some opportunities instead of just, and they may fit in those 5 options. You might be able to do something in there. So, but anyway, thank you.
You, Jim and Jessica.
Hi, I'm Jess. I live in Topsom. I do work at Williams Cone, but I'm going to try to be objective. I just two short things. One was I was wondering if the with the like enrollment projections, if they were able to control for the closing of the base in Topsom and in Brunswick, the Naval Air Base, because I feel like that probably had a huge impact on the population decline in the late 90s, early 2000s. And if you could separate that out to see if like that made a difference. And then the second thing is, I know that we are also in Topsom, there is a committee looking at the idea of a new community center. And the idea was brought up about like combination school community use. And if there was a way to cross-pollinate that to maybe, instead of having two separate, maybe there is an idea of combining that to combine efforts instead of having completely two different fundraising efforts in that regard. Thank you.
Thank you, Jessica. All right, thank you everyone for coming. This is a process that still has a long ways to go. We appreciate everybody staying here for a couple of hours, listening to it and educating yourselves and sharing your thoughts with us. It's very informative for the whole board, for the facilities committee to have that as we figure out the best path forward. So with that, I think we will call this workshop a night.